Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Drilling Deeper. I'm Kevin Yannick, editorial director of Pitt & Quarry, and today we've got a mid-year construction market update on tap with a special guest. But first, let's hear a word from our show sponsor. Did you know East Rock Solutions is now part of the Kemper Group? And together, they're raising the bar on parts availability, equipment solutions, and turnkey plant design. From the pit to the stockpile, Kemper Group has got your operation covered. To learn more, visit KemperEquipment.com or call 610-273-2066. Thanks to Kemper. Well, thanks again to Kemper. We've got with us once again Jack Kapansky. Jack, great to have you in the studio here today. How's it going?
Thrilled as always, Kevin. I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Doing great. Looking forward to talking about what's happening in construction markets, as I know you had just the other day an interview with the Dodge Construction Network expert economist about all things construction, at Pitt & Quarry. As you know, and many of you listening out there know, we're keeping tabs pretty regularly on what's happening in the various markets that aggregates are feeding into, and those are, the infrastructure market and non-residential, which makes up a lot of things, in the residential market, which has been interesting to watch of late too. And Jack, I think you probably got in some of that with your interview with Eric Gaus from Dodge in recent days, and there's a lot to talk about. There always is, really, when you think about what's happening in construction and what's happening around aggregates. But this is really the first touch point as Pitt & Quarry that we've had with Eric, again, at Dodge Construction Network. And tell us a little bit about what we can expect to hear, and a little bit about our featured guest today, Eric Gaus.
Yeah, absolutely. It was great talking with Eric. Like you mentioned, kind of the first time we've gotten a chance to sit down and talk with him. We've obviously worked extensively with Dodge Construction Network in the past, working with Richard Branch and Sarah Martin. Eric took over as senior economist at Dodge in March of this year. Previously, he spent almost 7 years with Moody's Analytics, serving as economist, senior economist, and ultimately director of Moody's Analytics. Prior to that, he taught and was a professor of economics and finance, business, other types of subjects, with stops at the University of Oregon, Ursinus, I hope I'm saying that right, Ursinus, and Haverford Colleges. And yeah, he was just a great interview, as always. I always like to say that I like talking to economists, whether it's Richard Branch or Sarah Martin in the past, Eric Gaus now, Ken Simonson at AGC, Anirban at ABC, because I always leave these interviews feeling a lot smarter than I did before, because these guys makes what can kind of maybe be a little bit of a dry topic or a confusing topic. They make it very easy to understand and break down. So we got into a lot of good stuff. We kind of covered the gamut as far as, again, like you mentioned, residential and non-building construction. We talked a little bit on the IIJA. We talked on workforce. We talked on sort of the overall construction industry economy, the overall nation's economy, a really wide-ranging conversation here. So it was great to get some of his insights, especially, again, being a little bit newer to the scene, and as he kind of gets a little more acclimatized to the construction industry. So I was struck, and we'll kind of get to some of the talking points here later in the episode after we hear from Eric. But there was a lot that he touched on that I think kind of rang true with what we've been hearing so far this year from producers, manufacturers, dealers, and there was also some stuff that I was kind of surprised by, as far as either where money's being allocated, what kind of projects are leading the way in different sectors, what kind of what the status of the IIJ is, and any potential future infrastructure bill. And I know you've had a chance to talk with a lot of different producers. You've been doing some site visits. I know we got a chance to visit with Kevin Keeney a couple weekends ago. I'm curious what kind of stuff you've been hearing, so we can maybe have some context going into this interview of sort of what you've been hearing from sort of the boots on the ground people, if you will. For sure.
I'm asking a lot of the same questions of producers and industry sources that you are, Jack. And 2025, again, you've heard it on this show before, it's the year of the tariff. We're continuing to talk about interest rates and inflation and some pain points and headwinds like those that should be impacting the industry either now or in the months and or years to come. But when you talk to the man on the street or the aggregate producer out there, Jane and Joe aggregate producer, overall, everyone pretty much maintains an optimistic, or at least a cautiously optimistic view on how things are going out there. So those macro trends, the global things happening out there, they're not necessarily trickling down here midway through 2025 at this point. When it comes to getting into quarries, these are local businesses. Those macroeconomic headwinds aren't necessarily making their way in. Mm-hmm. They continue to do their jobs. You mentioned IIJA, and it seems like that continues to provide the backbone for demand for our industry. And there's enough there, it seems, between non-res and residential, albeit residential still has a long way to go, but there's enough there, I would say, from what producers are telling us, that they feel good about the market. They're confident. They're still making investments. Maybe there's a little bit of pause there, I suppose. We just put the dealer issue out, and we heard there's some wait and see there. Tariffs. Some producers are wondering what that's going to look like. And we saw that kind of rear its head again the other day with President Trump kind of ramping up tariffs and making that a priority again here in mid-July. So that's not going to go away. And at some point we're going to feel that. But all in all, Jack, when you talk to our readers, it seems like they're happy. And again, infrastructure funding is there, and that continues to be the backbone of our industry. And as long as that's there, we should continue to feel good. If that's not, that's a different story. And I think Eric's going to get into that as you had talked to me offline in terms of what we could expect for beyond IIJ here, the next months or year or so, is that's going to expire in September of 26, I believe.
Yes. Yeah, so I won't spoil anything for anyone. You got to listen to the interview to hear what Eric has to say about IIJA and any potential future bill coming up. But yeah, no, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think you kind of hit on a lot of the stuff that we're going to hear Eric talk about. Again, kind of that optimism, but also some of that wait and see. Just kind of really adapting day by day, just based on what happens in the more global economic sense. I think one of the things that you'll kind of hear right off the bat in this interview that kind of surprised me is I mentioned sort of coming into this year, I had sort of felt like, and so sort of maybe heard from some producers, be it at our roundtable earlier in the year, or maybe some people in late 2024, kind of seemed like we were coming into this year with some of the same headwinds that we'd been facing for a lot of 2024. And he actually sort of corrected me, sort of put me in my place a little bit, and said, we actually entered 2025 with a lot of tailwinds, and then the tariffs and the interest rates and stuff kind of put a damper on that. So an interesting perspective, to say the least. And I won't give away too much more of the interview. We'll get into that here shortly, but I think it's always valuable to kind of compare and contrast the viewpoints of, again, the guys that are, or the guys and girls that are doing it, that are in the pits, in the quarries, working every day, and sort of are experiencing this firsthand, and the people that can kind of take that 10,000 foot view of things and kind of see how everything's playing out in, obviously in more than one piece. So, like I said, it was great talking with Eric. Hopefully we're able to have many more conversations here in the future. So without further ado, let's hand it over to Eric Gaus, Chief Economist, Dodge Construction Network. All right, we are now joined by Eric Gaus, Chief Economist at Dodge Construction Network. Eric, thanks so much for joining us today.
Happy to be here, Chuck.
First things first, I know for a period of time, I worked with Dodge Construction Network, and had, we worked with Richard Branch, Sarah Martin, obviously kind of a fresh face here at Dodge. Can you just kind of give the folks maybe a little bit of background on yourself and, stepping into this role at Dodge?
Sure. Yeah. Prior to coming to Dodge, I worked for 7 years at Moody's Analytics, in their modeling and economics team. Did a lot of forecasting on the international side. Prior to that, I was an academic. I spent 7 years working at small liberal arts colleges as a professor in southeastern Pennsylvania, where I live.
Excellent. Well, thrilled to be talking with you today. Certainly excited to work with you a little more now that you're here with Dodge. So excited for this to be our first conversation. Obviously, a lot to get into. So I guess I'll just go ahead and dive in to maximize our time here.
Sure.
Eric, obviously we're a little more than 6 months through the year here. Crazy to think we're already into July of 2025, but halfway through the year now, how would you kind of characterize the health of the nation's economy, given some of those headwinds that are maybe still present from 2024, the new ones that have emerged this year? And what are kind of your outlooks for the economy and those headwinds in the last 6 months?
Sure. So we actually started 2025 with a whole bunch of tailwinds, both from an economic perspective, right? The consumer was really, really strong. The financial situation for both businesses and consumers was really, really strong. So we were really sort of powering through into 2025. The economy has weakened significantly since then for a lot of different reasons, right? So most major one is that the Federal Reserve has interest rates well above the neutral rate. And so that's also by design. There was still a lot of inflation, trying to calm down the economy. Totally makes sense. I should also note, my day 3 was April 2nd. So I immediately had to jump into an exciting time as an economist to try and understand what was going on with tariffs and then how that might impact the economy and the construction sector in general. And so, that uncertainty that we've seen since the Trump administration has come in has really put a damper on the economy and has weakened it pretty significantly for the first half. And while I thought there was some hope for that uncertainty to be resolved, what I'm thinking of here particularly had to be with the rollback of the tariffs on China. That sort of gave me some hope that, oh, all right, this is exactly what we sort of expected. We'll put high tariffs, try and get some concessions from different countries and reel things back slowly over time. People will get more certainty and more clarity about where policy is headed, and the second half of the year would be strong. I'm starting to revise that opinion now. It seems as if that policy uncertainty is going to last a little bit longer than will be comfortable for everybody.
Yeah, no doubt. And it seems like one of those things that remains obviously very, very fluid, not just with China, but I know there's been some activity as far as certain trade agreements being either brokered or taken off the table in the UK and Canada and some other places. I guess just what do you foresee? I mean, I know you said you kind of altered your outlook based on some of these developments. Just, what do you expect, or what can people maybe look out for over the next 6 months? Maybe how has your forecast changed and what are you looking at?
Yeah, so like I said, I anticipated volatility and uncertainty to be declining and therefore the economy to be sort of a little bit stronger. However, I think that what we've been seeing probably won't go away too much. I think it will stay exactly where it is in terms of the level of uncertainty and sort of the general discomfort that that everybody's going to be feeling with not knowing where the policy is going to be going.
Gotcha. Along with, some of the things that are ongoing, obviously there's been, numerous global conflicts that have either, again, been continuing on from past years or, developing over the first 6 months of the year. Looking at at the economy as a whole, but also looking at, the construction industry specifically and kind of transitioning into that realm, what have some of these ongoing and developing global conflicts, what kind of impacts have these had on the economy as well as the construction industry, both on sort of the macro and micro levels?
Sure. I mean, the impact, the way that travels through the economy is largely through oil prices. Yeah, there's some stock market volatility as well, but the main impact, and particularly for the construction industry, is oil prices, right? So we saw that immediately after the attacks on the bombing in Iran and the attacks all over the place in the Middle East. Immediately, oil price spikes, and that is where we start to see the big problem. And that's true to a greater or lesser extent with Russia, Ukraine, where that conflict is sort of going. And so we'll sort of see how that all plays out. But in general, there will be these oil price spikes. If they persist, then it becomes a problem for the economy as a whole and the construction industry specifically, because the construction industry consumes a bunch of oil.
Absolutely need diesel to run all that equipment and keep everything moving. So yeah, that's definitely something to keep an eye on. Kind of moving fully more into the construction sector now, we talked about some of the headwinds that have emerged this year, some of the things that have been going on again with tariffs and trade deals and whatnot. And you obviously just touched on how the global conflicts are kind of impacting oil prices and how that will affect the construction industry. What have you kind of seen over the first 6 months about how the construction industry has sort of balanced some of these or been able to sort of take them on the chin? And how does that maybe compare to a year earlier with, again, some uncertainty, but also some tailwinds going on in 2024? Just can you kind of give a year over year look how the first 6 months of this year fared compared to last year?
Yeah, I would say that the first 6 months were more or less a continuation of last year. The one caveat on that is that we have seen the projects that are in the pipeline, the ones that are in planning stages and going towards a start, those have all taken, in most categories, have taken a lot longer to get through the pipeline. So they're still going in at roughly the same rate. That maybe slowed down a little bit, but they've been going in at the same rate. People are still want to be active, but it's taking longer to get through that planning phase to a start. We're also seeing a little bit of a pullback in terms of or delays in the construction process as well, where, and I think this is sort of sums up what the first half of the year is. Everybody's sitting on their hands. The Federal Reserve is sitting on their hands. Companies are sitting on their hands. Consumers are sitting on their hands, except for the first quarter where everybody bought the foreign imports early because they knew tariffs were coming, right? That's the only bit where people were active. But even then, that was relatively modest in the grand scheme of things. And it's more of a pull forward of consumption and behaviors as opposed to a change in sort of the situation of how a consumer is feeling or how the businesses are feeling. So everyone's just sort of sitting on their hands waiting to see because there's too much uncertainty. And that for now is going to be okay because, as I mentioned earlier, consumers and businesses financially are in a really good position. And so they can stomach waiting a little bit for a while. The question just comes, how long can they wait? And when do the wheels come off?
Right. No, that definitely makes sense. Do you anticipate, you say that can kind of be okay for now, and the question again is how long? Do you anticipate that kind of being the case for the rest of this year, bleeding into 2026? Do you foresee that maybe getting some kind of clarity or some kind of action in the construction industry over the rest of the year? What are your thoughts on that?
So great question. The main thing that I don't have a lot of clarity on yet, that I'm trying to sort of assess at this point to answer that question more fully, is that in aggregate, the consumer is healthy. In aggregate, businesses are healthy, but the distribution matters. So where there are pockets of financial conditions that are tight, that's where you're going to see the pain first. Right? And that's where you're going to see the loss of confidence in the economy. And once you lose confidence, that's when you slide into a recession where things get bad. So in aggregate, yeah, things can keep going for a while. And that's why it's really tricky to time when those kinds of things are going to really start to become problematic. I think we can handle it for, let's say 3 more months pretty comfortably. That's my best guess, but it is just a guess, again, because it really depends on how that distribution of financial conditions gets impacted.
Right. Absolutely. And you kind of mentioned something that I want to kind of jump ahead in our list of questions here to something that I think is relevant to what you're talking about. You talk about, some of these bigger construction projects, again, kind of construction firms sitting on their hands, people kind of waiting things out. Sort of, I know I've talked with a lot of people that have mentioned they brought a pretty big backlog in from 2024 into 2025 for various reasons. What impact do you think funding or maybe lack thereof from the IIJA is having in some of that? I know that when it passed, there was a lot of obviously excitement about getting all this new funding, but as the years have passed, in talking with people, it kind of seems there could either be, yeah, we've seen a lot of it in different sectors, or people saying we haven't seen as much as we thought we were going to, trouble getting funds dispersed. What role do you think, again, funding or lack thereof from IIJA is having in some of that hesitancy? And what do you maybe expect from the rest of the life of the bill, possibly moving forward into a new bill if we end up getting one?
Sure. First, to go sort of backwards through your questions, I don't think it's very likely that we would get a new one. This Congress and president don't seem to be interested in that yet. Maybe if there's a recession that's big enough, that might have that impact, but it seems unlikely. The big beautiful bill just got passed a few days ago, right? That already added a considerable amount to our deficits. So it's going to be a really tough pill to swallow for Republicans to then add even more, even if we are in a recession, even add more to the deficits and to our debt. It's going to be really, really hard to make that happen. So I find it an unlikely proposition that there would be more funding coming. The funding that has been distributed, again, we also run into this problem where the administration has taken down the website that told us where all of the money was going. So it's very hard to get insight into how that is going at the moment. That being said, most of the funding has been going towards streets and bridges. That has slowed down as well because of some of the issues in sort of getting the money after the fact. But that being said, a lot of there have been a ton of projects that have already been completed or have been allocated the money to start and get going. So most, actually, the vast majority of the IIJ funding had already been sort of allocated prior to the administration coming into office. And so, like I said, that was a tailwind in the sense that it takes a while for these projects to sort of actually run through all of the money, and it's really hard to claw a lot of those back, particularly streets and bridges. Because once communities realize that, oh, we're getting a new bridge, right? Like, it's really hard to then say, we're going to take this away from you. And I also think that specific Congress members are also going to be very, very sensitive to that going into the 2026 midterms. So I don't anticipate too much on the streets and bridges side. But as we saw with the bill that was just passed, sort of rolling back environmental side of things. So the IIJA also included some environmental provisions. The IRA did the same thing, and those are going to get unwound as much as they can. So as much clawbacks as they can over those. That's where I see sort of the bigger sort of weakness or impact of funding on the construction industry.
Right. Okay. Appreciate that insight. Taking a shift to kind of look at non-residential construction now, obviously a key aspect of the construction industry as a whole. What does the first half of the year kind of look like for non-residential? I know really over the last several years, but especially in 2024 as well, hearing a lot about manufacturing and data centers really leading the way and being sort of the buoy of that subset. Is that still the case? Are there some other subsets people should keep their eye on? And what do you maybe anticipate for the second half of the year?
Sure. Manufacturing has pulled back pretty significantly in the first half of the year. The year to date through April was something like down negative 50%. So 50, just to clarify, right? So that was a ton. But we have to also remember manufacturing is coming off of a ridiculous high. So our forecast is still for it to be higher than the pre-pandemic levels in terms of starts in manufacturing. So yes, year over year, it looks atrocious. But if you sort of look at it in terms of sort of overall activity relative to a longer term benchmark, the manufacturing sector is still decently strong. It's not, going gangbusters. And actually, there are very few new plants in planning, largely because, remember, these are very long-term projects, cost a lot of money to put up a manufacturing plant. With the level of uncertainty, there are very few companies that are willing to pull the trigger if they can't figure out exactly what their return on investment is going to be. And with the tariff situation being the way that it is, it's very understandable that these firms would say, well, we got to wait until we have more information. So I don't see manufacturing really accelerating through the back half of the year. However, the projects that were sort of in train, those will probably continue at just as expected. Data centers is, of course, propping up non-res quite a bit. The other part that is that's contributing to non-res being decent is large mega projects, particularly in the healthcare and prisons space. So there's a $5 billion project going up in Texas hospital, and Rikers Island is being decommissioned, and so there are a bunch of prisons in the New York tri-state area that are offsetting Rikers Island being decommissioned. So we've got a lot of that kind of really big activity happening that is sort of propping up different subsectors. Generally speaking, again, from 2024 to today, there were a whole bunch of tailwinds that are sort of keeping things decent. And like I said, everybody's just sort of pausing, still want to do activity, still have the capital to do activity, right? Like all of the sort of ingredients are there. It's just there's this one big cloud on the horizon that is keeping everybody from pushing forward.
Right. No, that makes sense. I think to your point, now that you mentioned the sort of drop in manufacturing year over year, it is kind of crazy to see that level of drop, but still have it be above pre-pandemic level. So I think that just kind of is a fascinating way, at least for me, to put into perspective of like, this is still doing very well, but before, I mean, it was just insurmountably huge.
Yes. Yeah. No. I think it's very hard for people to realize just how big 2023 was in terms of manufacturing. So
yeah, absolutely. So taking a look at residential now, what have been your biggest takeaways from the first half of the year, and what do you think the rest of 2025 holds for the subset?
So res has been struggling, particularly on the single family side. Multifamily has been doing a little bit better. That mostly has to do with the time lags between how long it takes to construct multifamily. So there were a bunch of, still projects that were planned last year that are sort of going through the pipeline and coming out the other end. Whereas single family tends to respond a little bit more quickly, right? And given the levels of uncertainty, it's very easy for contractors and developers to sort of pull back there. So they have. The other dynamic that we've been keeping track of is housing shortage. There still is, on a national level, a housing shortage. What's very interesting is what has been happening regionally. In the South, that housing shortage has more or less come into balance, right? So it's a combination of a couple of things. It's people moving into retirement homes, elderly people moving into retirement homes, opening up existing spaces. We've seen the level of inventory increase in the South, right, of existing home sales, and we're also seeing that on the new home side, things are slowing down because people are able to find homes, and there's been a ton of construction there. However, if you look at the sort of quintessentially low affordability regions, California, New York, Seattle, those places, wherever you can sort of think that's a really expensive place to live, that's where there's still a housing shortage, right? And so what we sort of see is that this is going to be a weird sort of situation where, one, there's going to be a lot of multifamily to sort of cover the problem of affordability, and it's going to be very regionally specific, right? The South is probably going to be slowing down a little bit, just keeping pace with household growth, whereas the North and the West, the Northeast and the West, broadly speaking, are going to be are going to have a larger increase in multifamily, and single family will just sort of slow down a little bit, just because that tends to be more on the luxury side, and it's just not what the market needs at the moment.
Right. No, I get what you're saying. Certainly a lot of factors at play there. I know you already talked about it a little bit when we were going over IIJA. You kind of went into some of the, funding for streets and bridges. You talked about maybe some of the pullback in the environmental realm. So not to maybe have you rehash what you just said before, but just finally taking a look at non-building. Just kind of would love to get your analysis for the first half and your anticipation for the second half of the year for that sector as well.
Yeah, we have not changed our forecast very much for non-building, largely because the tailwinds were so strong, right? And if anything, streets and bridges, fewer of them started than we expected in 2024, but they were all projects that had been slated through IIJA and allocated money, and so we that just gets sort of pushed forward. So maybe there's a little bit of a pullback to some degree, but then there's these other projects that are getting delayed into 2025. So on the whole, we sort of feel like the building, non-building has been pretty robust and will continue to be robust-ish through 2025. Now, we'll see how that sort of pans out in the second half. I'm, again, a little bit nervous about how the second half will sort of come together. Becoming slightly more pessimistic by the day, but we'll see where we land.
Right. Yeah. I'll be sure to keep checking in with you over the second half of the year, see where we're standing. Obviously a factor that has been, had a big impact on the construction sector for many years before now, and just continues to be an issue, obviously, is the workforce. The skilled workforce or lack thereof. How would you assess the current state of the construction labor market? Have there been improvements so far this year, and what kind of trends are you seeing in wages, workforce availability, and productivity?
Sure. So largely speaking, the labor market, and this is economy wide, the labor market's slowing down. And you can see this just trickle straight through to the construction sector as well. We're still adding jobs, just like the broader economy is still adding jobs, but it's definitely weakening. Again, that's sticking to script, right? That's the whole idea of keeping monetary policy rates high in order to slow down the economy so that inflation doesn't reignite. That being said, within the construction industry, again, you know how important labor is regionally, as opposed to just how many construction workers are there, right? It's very specific to where the job sites happen to be. The mega projects are actually causing a big problem for that, and that's where you get probably some of the explanation for the backlogs that you mentioned earlier, in terms of there are projects that people want to get working on, but they don't have the workers to actually put the product in the building, right? So that's super problematic. And some of these large mega projects are exacerbating that problem because they're sucking up all the resources, particularly data centers in sort of Virginia area, right? Like that's causing a problem in that particular location. Generally speaking, as you're sort of struggling to find workers, you tend to hire fewer and fewer productive workers, right? Like you're scraping the bottom of the barrel here, right? So productivity in general is as it has been for years and years and years in the construction industry, more or less flatlined, right? Like we're not seeing a lot, and wages are of course creeping up. Are they that much higher than it's not an excessive amount, but it is still, relatively strong relative to the rest of the economy, right? Again, dealing with the labor shortage, that's just what you're going to get.
Yeah. And it's one of those things that for as long as it's impacted the construction industry specifically, obviously, there's been its ups and downs in the, overall economy and looking nationwide. But again, the way it's been specifically affecting the construction industry, it sounds like these companies, they're all sort of saying the right things, they're all doing the right things, they're getting into the schools, they're getting into vocation centers, they're, finding ways to make it appealing, but, there still can't seem to be that breakthrough of really getting the appeal of high paying good construction jobs out to the public and making it seem enticing. So I mean, at this point, just what more do you think construction industry members, be it producers, manufacturers, dealers, even what more do you think can be done to kind of either entice people into these careers, to let them, to just spread the word about the industry itself? What more can be done to really make this to hopefully increase the availability of skilled workers?
That is a great question, and one, being so young in the industry, I don't think I have a very good answer for, right? So I mean, I might have a very interesting perspective in a few months, but at this point, that is one of those questions where it's like, yeah, that one, probably less aware than you are of all of the steps that the industry has made to try and make it as attractive as possible. But also, this is one of those problems that we're running into with the policy that's being enacted currently, which is most of those jobs are really attractive to foreign-born workers. And if you sort of look at it, right, 20% on average across the country of workers in the construction industry are foreign-born. It's a very that is a pipeline that has just been shut off, and in fact, so it's something like 750,000 since the beginning of the year. 750,000 foreign workers have left the employment market. Right, so they've left the labor force.
Wow.
That's a lot. So that's like that's just a ton of people, and you got to think that that's also coming out of the construction sector as well, right? And so that's super problematic. The other thing that's really fascinating about it is also the distribution of where there are more foreign workers within the construction sector. That's in Texas, California, and New York, right? Those are sort of the big ones, and Florida, right? Those 4 states, the rates of foreign-born construction workers are more like 35% as opposed to 20% that's quoted nationally. So now you've got a sort of double whammy, right? Regional matters quite a bit for construction, and then here is where you not only have a lot of demand for construction, but you also are now losing the labor force that you otherwise probably would be able to tap into pretty easily.
Right. Yeah, definitely a huge impact there. And honestly, one that I hadn't even, hadn't taken into account when, again, with 20% and up to 35% in some places, like you're saying, that's pretty sensible impact there. So certainly something to keep an eye on. We've obviously touched a lot of ground here, Eric, and I certainly appreciate all the insight. Looking at the last 6 months of 2025, looking into the start of 2026 even, what advice would you give to contractors, developers, investors as they kind of plan the remainder of this year and look ahead to the new year?
Yeah, I think the number one thing is to be patient, right? It's going to feel very uncomfortable. And I think everybody, I get clients asking me all the time, what's happening? It's like, yeah, we are just in a place where there's a lot of uncertainty, and that feels very, very uncomfortable. The good news is businesses and consumers are in a good position. Again, in aggregate, there's distributional things, but in aggregate, the economy is actually in a fairly good position. Because, there are some issues that we're going to need to get worked out. The Fed's going to need to figure out whether inflation matters more or employment matters more going forward, right? So whether to raise or lower interest rates. My guess is that they're going to lower interest rates, but I think they're going to wait quite a while before they get there. And again, you just have to be patient with all of that. I think everybody is ready to go, right? Lots of people are shovel ready, right? But we just need to be patient and not keep calm and carry on, as the British might say.
Thanks again to Eric Gaus, chief economist at Dodge Construction Network. A lot of good insight there. Appreciate him taking the time to join us. Want to give a shout out to, I believe it's Amy Repke, I believe her name is, last name is, at Dodge Construction Network, for helping get this set up. She was great to work with, and definitely a big help in making this happen. So thank you, Amy. Thank you, Eric. A lot to break down from that. Squeezed a lot into a 30-minute conversation, touched on a lot of different topics, and I think got a lot to pull from that. So just, trying to break it down to make sense of it. Like we mentioned going into the interview, we entered 25 with some stronger headwinds than at least I had anticipated or thought we were. And that, he kind of touched on the interest rates from the Fed and some of the tariffs that were being put in place by President Trump, sort of cooling the economy a little bit. And I think, like you mentioned, he also touched on sort of hoping that some more certainty and clarity will start to arise. yet to be seen if that is going to kind of be the case for the second half of this year, as it's, always very evolving. You kind of mentioned getting more involved in tariffs and doing more, sort of when one door opens, it seems like another one closes in some sense with that kind of stuff, with the trade deals and tariffs and whatnot. So I think one of the things, and we were talking about this right before the episode, that I think kind of surprised both of us. He mentioned that oil prices have been the biggest impact of the global conflicts of, what's going on in the Middle East, what's going on in Ukraine and Russia. I haven't necessarily seen that. So I don't know if that's more on the diesel side. I mean, I don't drive a diesel car. I don't think you do either. That kind of took me by surprise. I wasn't, it is obviously a very common effect with these kind of causes, but I haven't personally been seeing that yet. So I was kind of surprised by that analysis.
Yeah, interesting. I had talked to a producer just a couple of weeks ago, Jack, and he was saying that the oil prices, they have been manageable. They haven't been crazy. But then I think within the last 2-3 weeks, we did see Israel and Iran go at it with each other, and I think I saw some headlines talking about that creating some instability with oil. I'm not sure where that's landed at this point. Anytime there's conflict in the Middle East, it seems like that has an effect on the price of oil. So interesting that Eric was already kind of putting that out there. Maybe that shouldn't be a surprise, or that's not a surprise to our listeners, but that obviously is going to drive things or affect bigger picture buying decisions. If your price of fuel is that much higher, it kind of limits what you can do elsewhere, and you got to have that fuel. Yeah. So interesting that he put that out there, because I guess it goes to show too that how volatile that market, the oil market, is. Things can change on a dime. Absolutely. Just like that. Another thing that he kind of had shared, Jack, that I kind of found interesting was he was looking ahead to IIJA, but also providing an update of sorts on where that money is and how it's been spent and allocated. And it kind of was an update for me personally, I would say, because up until this point, I would say I've always had the impression from economists and industry experts that there's a lot more money in the pipeline coming from summer 2025 forward for IIJA, because we were very slow to get that out. And from what Eric shared, it seems like we've kind of caught up with where we need to be, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. That means there's still money in the pipeline to come, but you think about that being a 5-year bill, and we're in year 4 of that, I guess, with next year being the 5th and final year. There's some stability, but maybe that surplus of IIJA funding that was there for a long while because it was, again, slow getting out, maybe that's starting to get to a more normal position. So not necessarily a bad thing, but if you're looking forward to rampant infrastructure projects federally, I suppose that allocated funding is becoming a little bit more normal. So expect project creation to be a little bit more normal as well coming out of that.
Yeah, and that was certainly my takeaway as well. And I think one of the things that he hit on that was kind of interesting, he talked about, there's projects that are currently being worked on, there's projects that are finished, and the part that he mentioned that kind of stuck out to me is that there's projects that are, I guess, kind of in planning, which is, I know how a lot of these economic companies, how the Dodge, the ABC, the AGC kind of look at projects in planning, and the money's already allocated. It just hasn't necessarily been spent yet. So he looked at that as another big headwind, or as another big tailwind, excuse me. Basically having these projects, having the money saying, okay, this is going to go to you. We're going to have this money. We're going to be able to start this. I think it's just a matter of, another thing he touched on that we've heard a lot, and I heard a lot from producers at our roundtable earlier this year, big backlog. Everybody's coming into 2025, whether it was weather related, whether it was just being so busy in 2024, whatever it is, people are coming into 25 with this big backlog. So I think having the money allocated for a lot of these, he kind of mentioned mostly streets and bridge projects, talked about a little bit of a pullback maybe on the economic side of things that are included in IIJA. You and I kind of mentioned maybe kind of expected with a Republican administration. But yeah, noting that allocated funding is hopefully going to be a big boon to the non-building sector moving forward the rest of this year. That's definitely positive. What is maybe not so positive, and I think maybe a surprise to some people, maybe not, doesn't necessarily predict that there's going to be another infrastructure bill following IIJA. We've obviously got a little over a year, about a year and 3 months now or so. I don't know. I just feel like there was so much bipartisan excitement and support for IIJA, and it was something that everyone kind of agreed that the infrastructure of this country needs to get figured out. And it would just kind of surprise me a little bit if there isn't maybe a continuation, or if there isn't something else done to continue moving this effort forward.
Yeah, if I was betting if we're going to get another 5-year or 6-year, multi-year type of infrastructure bill federally, I would say it's probably not going to happen in 2026. And I guess I would say that for a couple of reasons. One, we just saw the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Is that right, Jack?
Something like that.
Yeah. So that just came forward, and that's a lot of money. It's a lot of spending, and that's here in 2025. So I think the appetite to put more money forward of the size of an IIJA anytime soon is not necessarily going to be this is going to be the big bill that we're going to have and we're going to live with for quite some time. Then when I think ahead to 2026, again with IIJA money or IIJA, that act expiring September 30th, 2026, the midterms are right beyond there. And if we're going to be serious about pushing through another multi-year infrastructure bill, we're going to have to get in front of that sooner than later. So it's almost a matter of kind of balancing, hey, we just passed this One Big Beautiful Bill Act, and finding the next sweet spot to say, hey, now it's time to do another big bill federally. Will the Trump administration want to do that? I think it's possible because the president has always really been pro-infrastructure and talked about infrastructure. He's a builder, I think he always said on the campaign trail. So, and it like you said, there was bipartisan support for that. We did see some people come across the aisle on IIJA. So I don't know. That's going to be something to watch for sure. And I thought, Eric Gaus's perspective on that was interesting. It was something I hadn't really thought of before, but it's very realistic, and we're going to be getting more into that sort of discussion here sooner than later.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Just a couple other quick talking points from my interview with Eric that I thought really kind of stuck out. We talked again about res, and non-building, and I think one of the things that was most stark to me, I had asked him, I'm like, non-residential is manufacturing and data centers still driving the market. Obviously, those have been big boons since warehouses have kind of dropped off in the last couple of years. Anticipated, but still a drop off. And he had mentioned 50% drop in April in manufacturing. I believe he was talking year over year. He may have been talking year to date. Forgive me. And you kind of sit back and you go, whoa, manufacturing, like this super important piece of non-residential, has fallen 50%. It's like, that's crazy. And then he follows that up with, yeah, but it's still above pre-pandemic levels. Like, that just shows you how incredibly high manufacturing got in 22, 23, 24, that it's, can fall half of what it is, and it's still above 2019, 2018, whenever it is level. So he did mention data centers are still a big driver for non-res. I don't think that's any surprise to people that are kind of following that. Those are still popping up all over the place. I know I put together a Dodge Momentum Index item yesterday, and I'm pretty sure for the three, not institutional, commercial, the three biggest commercial products are data centers. Wherever they are, it was the so-and-so data center here, the so-and-so data center there, the so-and-so data center there, so that definitely holds true. And then, he talked a little bit about residential as well, single-family hurting a little bit with housing shortages, and multifamilies kind of picking up the slack with not only availability but affordability. Right. So that's really one of those ones that, it's kind of like flip a coin. When one's struggling, the other one is picking up the pace.
Got to live somewhere, don't you?
You got to live somewhere. So, yeah, just kind of an interesting outlook on some of the subsectors within the construction industry.
Yeah, tremendous variety of topics there. Great job with the interview, Jack, and thanks again to Eric at Dodge Construction Network for joining us. Well, beyond our interview and our fodder coming off that interview with Eric, there's some related content you should seek out from Pit and Quarry. We're here in the mid-month of July at this point, and Jack and I, in recent weeks, put out our market reference guide, our 2025 market reference guide, that polybagged with our regular July edition. So if you've got that in hand, make sure you pull out that market reference guide. It's got a lot of good insight on the economy and where the industry is at this point in time. And even more recently, this week, in fact, as we're shooting this podcast, Jack, we published online the latest market insights piece from our friends and partners at FMI Capital Advisors. So you can look for the latest work of George Redden, Rob Minio, and Evan Coughlin on pittandcorey.com. Specifically, we've got that article tagged at pittandcorey.com/FMI 2025. So you can kind of get their mid-year update on what it is they're seeing in construction materials and demand and those sorts of macroeconomic things that we heard from a bit from Eric. In terms of our next episode of Drilling Deeper, we're going to have Steve Fuller, the author of the Going Home Safely Every Day column. That's the one appearing monthly in our safety section in Pitt and Corey. Steve's been a new edition of the magazine. I think he started writing for us in November of 2024, and he's been doing a great job. Mentioned him on one of the recent podcasts, how he takes a topic and really gets deep down into it. Something simple as fatigue management or heat stress, but he brings real-world experience from my view that I think everybody can really take something away from. So we're going to get into some safety and health topics with Steve, hear about his experience working as a safety consultant within the industry and out, and you can look forward to that in another couple weeks. Again, Steve Fuller, author of the Going Home Safely Every Day column. And beyond episode 46, we're starting to get some ideas in the works for our 2 August episodes. Don't want to toot the horn just yet, but I've got a couple of producers that finalizing to get some interviews and to feature them as special guests in August episodes of Drilling Deeper. So more to come probably on our episode 46 to feature Steve Fuller. Outside of that, again, pick up your July edition. That's the dealer issue. Again, that's the one that polybagged with our 2025 market reference guide. I'd advise you to check out our last episode of the show. That's the one featuring the dealer issue when we brought Rock Machinery's Brian Fazer on and Crush Mode's Micah Tisver. So we'd encourage you to hear what they have to say, again, on episode 44. And right now, Jack, we're kind of coming down the home stretch for our August edition, which is kind of crazy because we just celebrated the 4th of July. But again, as editors, we're always working a little bit further ahead because of our printer's deadline. Mm-hmm. So you can look forward to some washing and classifying content in that, along with your regular assortment of technology and business and safety content. So our August edition will be coming in the next couple of weeks. But again, I want to thank Eric Gaus, Dodge Construction Network, for joining us. And we want to make sure we thank Kemper one more time. Did you know East Rock Solutions is now part of the Kemper Group? And together, they're raising the bar on parts availability, equipment solutions, and turnkey plant design. From the pit to the stockpile, Kemper Group has got your operation covered. To learn more, visit KemperEquipment.com or call 610-273-2066. Thanks to Kemper. Well, that's going to do it for today's episode. Jack, again, great job with the interview, and thanks again for Eric, and we will see you next time.
See you.